Lost and Found. Mary was a woman with a kind heart. She lived in a small house near a big city. Every day she cooked, cleaned, and worked hard. But Mary had a deep sadness in her heart. She often sat alone, thinking about her past. Many years ago, her little son, Tom, went missing. He was only 5 years old. One sunny afternoon, he played in the park near their home. Mary was talking to a friend, and when she looked back, Tom was gone. She called his name, but he didn't answer. Mary searched everywhere for Tom. She asked the neighbours, went to the police, and even put up posters in the streets. "Have you seen this boy?" she asked every stranger she met. But no one knew where Tom had gone. Every night Mary sat by the window. She looked at the stars and prayed. "Please, let me see my son again," she whispered. Her neighbours often saw her sitting there. They felt sorry for her, but they didn't know how to help. Mary never stopped hoping. She kept a picture of Tom in her pocket. She showed it to people in the market, at the bus station, and even to travellers passing by. Most people shook their heads and said no. Still, Mary did not give up. Years passed, but Mary's love for Tom stayed strong. She believed he was still alive. She dreamed of the day they would meet again. Her friends told her to move on, but Mary could not forget her son. One morning, Mary got a letter in the mail. It had no name, just an address. The letter said, "Come to this place. I have something to tell you about Tom." Mary's hands shook as she held the paper. Her heart raced with both fear and hope. She packed her bag quickly. She didn't know what she would find, but she felt a new strength in her heart. Mary walked to the bus stop, holding Tom's picture tightly. She looked at the address again and whispered, "Maybe this is the day." Mary sat on the bus, staring out of the window. The city was far behind her now, and the roads grew quieter. She clutched the letter in her hand, reading it over and over. Who sent this? She wondered. Her heart was filled with both hope and fear. The bus stopped at a small town. Mary got off and looked around. The place was quiet, with only a few people walking in the streets. She checked the address on the letter and asked a shopkeeper for directions. The man pointed to a narrow street. "It's down there," he said. Mary followed the street until she reached a small house. The house looked old, with flowers growing in the garden. She hesitated for a moment, then knocked on the door. Her hands were shaking. A woman opened the door. She was tall, with grey hair and a kind face. "Are you Mary?" the woman asked softly. Mary nodded. The woman smiled and said, "Come inside. We need to talk." Inside the house, Mary saw pictures on the walls and books on a small table. The woman offered her tea and said, "My name is Ruth. I know why you're here." Mary's eyes widened. "Do you know where my son is?" she asked quickly. Ruth nodded and took a deep breath. "I believe I do," she said. "Many years ago I found a little boy. He was alone and scared. He didn't remember much, not even his full name. I took him in and raised him as my own." Mary's hands trembled. "Is he Tom?" she whispered. Ruth stood up and brought a picture from the shelf. She handed it to Mary. Mary looked at the photo and tears filled her eyes. The boy in the picture looked older, but she could see it was Tom. "He's grown now," Ruth said. "He's a man with his own life. But I kept the truth from him because I didn't know who his family was. Now I think it's time for you to meet him." Mary couldn't speak. She held the picture close to her heart and cried. After all these years, she was so close to finding her son. Mary spent the night at Ruth's house. She couldn't sleep. Her mind was full of questions. What will Tom think of me? Will he even remember me? She wondered. Ruth tried to comfort her, saying, "Tom is a good man. He will listen to you." The next morning, Ruth handed Mary an address. "He works at a bookstore in the city," Ruth said. "You can find him there." Mary looked at the paper and held it tightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. Mary took a bus back to the city. The streets were busy, full of people and noise. She followed the directions until she reached a small bookstore. The sign above the door said, "Tom's Books." Her heart skipped a beat when she read his name. She stood outside for a few moments, watching through the window. A young man was inside arranging books on a shelf. He had dark hair and a kind face. Mary felt tears in her eyes. "That's him," she thought. Finally, she walked inside. The smell of books filled the air. Tom turned around when he heard the door open. He smiled politely and said, "Hello, can I help you?" Mary froze. She didn't know what to say. I'm looking for Tom," she said quietly. The young man nodded. "That's me," he replied. Mary's hands trembled as she reached into her bag. She pulled out an old photo of a little boy. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. Tom took the photo and looked at it carefully. His eyes widened. This is me," he said slowly. "Where did you get this?" Mary felt her throat tighten. "I'm your mother," she whispered. "I've been looking for you for so many years." Tom stared at her, his face full of confusion. "My mother?" he repeated. He sat down on a chair, still holding the photo. "I don't understand. Ruth is my mother." Mary took a deep breath and said, "Ruth took care of you when you were lost. But I'm your real mother." The room was silent. Tom looked at Mary, his eyes filled with questions. "Why did it take you so long to find me?" he asked. Mary felt a tear roll down her cheek. "I never stopped searching," she said softly. "I never gave up hope." Tom sat quietly, staring at the photo. He didn't know what to say. Mary could see the confusion and pain in his eyes. She felt her heart breaking all over again. "I know this is hard to believe," she said softly, "but I'm telling you the truth." Tom looked up at her. "Ruth never told me about this," he said. "She said she was my mother." Mary nodded. "She is your mother in many ways," she replied. "She loved you and raised you. I owe her everything for keeping you safe." Tom leaned back in his chair, trying to process the information. "Why did we get separated?" he asked. Mary took a deep breath and began to explain. "It was a market day," she said. "You were only 4 years old. We were walking through the crowd when you let go of my hand. I turned around and you were gone." She paused, her voice trembling. "I searched everywhere for you. I called your name again and again. The police couldn't help. I thought I had lost you forever. I didn't know Ruth had found you." Tom's eyes filled with tears. He tried to imagine himself as a little boy, lost and alone in the crowd. "Ruth found me?" he asked. Mary nodded. "She took you home and cared for you like her own child. She must have loved you very much." Tom rubbed his eyes and looked at Mary. "But why didn't she tell me the truth?" he asked. Mary hesitated. "Maybe she was afraid," she said. "Maybe she thought it would hurt you to know, or maybe she didn't want to lose you." The room was silent for a moment. Then Tom said, "I don't know what to feel. Ruth is the only mother I've ever known. But now you're here, and everything is different." Mary reached out and placed her hand on his. "I don't want to take Ruth's place," she said. "She will always be important to you. I just want to be a part of your life. I've missed so much already." Tom looked at her, his emotions swirling inside. "This is a lot to take in," he admitted. "But I want to know more. I want to understand everything." Mary smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll be here." Over the next few days, Tom and Mary spent more time together. They talked about their lives, trying to fill in the missing years. Mary told Tom about the small house she lived in and the job she had as a tailor. She spoke about the nights she spent thinking about him, hoping he was safe and happy. Tom listened quietly, trying to imagine her life without him. He shared stories about Ruth, describing how she used to bake cookies for him and how she always hugged him when he was sad. "She was a good mother," Tom said softly. "She gave me everything I needed." Mary smiled, though her eyes were sad. "I'm glad she was there for you," she said. "You deserved a mother who loved you." Tom nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. He missed Ruth, but also felt a growing connection with Mary. One afternoon, Mary showed Tom an old scrapbook. It was filled with photos and notes. "These are all the letters I wrote to the police," she said, pointing to a stack of papers. "And these are the flyers I made with your picture on them. I gave them to everyone I could." Tom turned the pages slowly, his hands trembling. He saw a photo of himself as a little boy, smiling and holding a red ball. "I remember this ball," he said, his voice cracking. "I used to play with it all the time." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "You loved that ball," she said. "You never let it go. It was your favourite toy." They both sat in silence, looking at the picture. For the first time, Tom felt a deep connection to his past. As the days passed, Tom began to trust Mary more. He asked her questions about their family and their life before they were separated. Mary answered every question with patience, her voice filled with love. One evening, as they sat together, Tom said, "I don't know if I'll ever understand why all this happened, but I'm glad you found me." Mary smiled, her heart full of joy. "I'm glad too," she said. "I've waited so long for this moment." Tom reached out and hugged Mary for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to her. For the first time in years, Mary felt whole again. She had her son back, and nothing else mattered. The next morning, Tom and Mary decided to take a walk through the park near Mary's house. The sun was shining, and the birds sang sweet songs. It was the first time in years that Mary felt at peace. Tom walked beside her, holding the scrapbook they had looked through the night before. As they sat on a bench, Tom opened the scrapbook again. He'd turned to a page with a picture of a small house. "Is this where we lived?" he asked. Mary nodded, her smile warm. "Yes, that was our home. You used to run in the garden and chase butterflies." Tom stared at the photo, trying to remember. "I don't remember much," he said, his voice low. "But I feel something. It feels like home." Mary placed her hand on his. "It was our home, and it will always be part of us." Later that day, Mary showed Tom an old box filled with toys and clothes from his childhood. Tom picked up a tiny blue shirt and smiled. "I wore this?" he asked. Mary laughed softly. "Yes, you loved that shirt. You never wanted to take it off." They spent hours going through the box, sharing memories and stories. Each item in the box brought them closer together, building a bridge over the years they had lost. Mary's heart swelled with love as she saw Tom smile and laugh, something she had dreamed of for so long. That evening, Mary prepared Tom's favourite meal, something she used to cook when he was a little boy. Tom took a bite and closed his eyes. "This tastes like home," he said. Mary's eyes filled with tears. "I'm glad you feel that way," she said softly. As the days turned into weeks, Tom and Mary grew inseparable. Tom decided to move closer to Mary so they could spend more time together. "I don't want to lose you again," he said one day. Mary hugged him tightly, her heart overflowing with happiness. One sunny afternoon, they planted a tree in Mary's garden. "This tree will grow, just like our bond," Mary said. Tom smiled and nodded. "It will remind us of everything we've been through," he added. Years later, the tree stood tall, its branches stretching toward the sky. Tom and Mary often sat under it, sharing stories and laughter. Their journey was not easy, but they had found each other again, and in each other they found hope, love, and a new beginning.